My name is Natalie. I'm 34 years old and I'm an occupational therapist at Atrium Health in Charlotte, North Carolina. I drive a silver Honda CR-V with a dent in the rear bumper I've been meaning to fix for a year, and I keep a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder every morning because I've never managed to be a person who functions without it. These are small things, ordinary things, but I tell you them because the story I'm about to share is one that people often receive as extraordinary, and I need you to understand that it came from an ordinary woman. A woman with a dented bumper and a cold coffee problem, and a family that, for a very long time, did not see her at all. On a Tuesday morning in April of 2023, I drove 40 minutes from Charlotte to Gastonia on I-85 with the windows cracked and the radio on low, and my stomach in a knot I couldn't explain. I'd been asked to attend a family meeting at Sunrise Senior Living, the memory care facility on Robinson Road where my grandmother had lived for the past 6 years. The request had come from Sandra Mills, Vera's care coordinator, over the phone the week before. Sandra said it gently. Sandra always said difficult things gently, that my grandmother had requested a gathering of her immediate family, and that there would be someone present from her attorney's office. I had called Sandra back an hour later and asked if my grandmother was all right. She said Vera was comfortable and stable. She said the meeting was something my grandmother had specifically arranged. And I asked if I should prepare anything. Sandra said just to come. So I came. I drove past the billboard for the Bojangles on the Gastonia exit that I'd driven past 100 times. I turned onto Robinson Road and pulled into the Sunrise parking lot and sat in my car for a moment with the engine off, listening to the quiet. A Carolina wren was working through something in the oak tree near the entrance. The sky was the pale blue of early April in North Carolina, when the warmth hasn't fully arrived yet, but the light has. I didn't know what was about to happen inside that building. I had some loose, unformed intuitions that I hadn't let myself follow to their conclusion. I'd been not following them to their conclusion for 6 years. Before we get any further, please like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. I mean that. I'm not here for anything I haven't earned. And drop your location and the local time in the comments right now. I want to know where you are as you're listening to this. I always want to know. My parents were already in the conference room when I arrived. My father, Charles Okafor, was 69 years old, 3 years into his retirement from civil engineering, and he sat at the laminate table with the posture of a man waiting for news that would require composure. My mother Patricia was beside him, one hand close to his arm on the table. My brother Marcus, 37, had flown from Atlanta that morning. I'd heard him tell my father in the hallway that he'd rescheduled a closing to be there. A piece of information he delivered with the subtle weight of a man who needs you to know what he sacrificed to show up. He sat with his phone face down on the table in a gesture meant to communicate presence but still felt like restraint. My sister Denise, 40, had driven from a Charlotte hotel where she'd stayed overnight. She had her legal notepad. She always had her legal notepad. And across the table from all of us sat a compact man in a gray pinstripe suit named Ronald Akins, of Akins and Holloway in Gastonia. He was my grandmother's attorney. His briefcase was on the table in front of him, closed. Sandra Mills stood near the door, not quite in the meeting, not quite out of it. I sat down. Ronald nodded at me, and we began. But nothing about that Tuesday morning makes sense without the 6 years that came before it. And those 6 years don't make sense without the entire life that preceded them. My grandmother's life, the one she built on Dunmore Street, and the particular quality of love she kept there. My grandmother, Vera Louise Okafor, was born in 1940 in Concord, North Carolina, the third of 6 children of Lila and Obadiah Monroe. She was sharp and quiet in the way that certain women from certain places and certain generations were sharp and quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because they had learned early which rooms received what they had to offer and which did not. She met my grandfather James Okafor in 1963 at a church social in Gastonia and married him 3 months later, a speed that might have scandalized her mother if her mother hadn't taken one look at James and understood completely. They made a life on Dunmore Street. A three-bedroom brick house that James bought in 1964 for $19,000 and which my grandmother maintained with a devotion that bordered on liturgical. The porch swept every morning, the rose bushes along the front walk pruned every spring with the focused seriousness of someone diffusing something important. The interior always clean and smelling of cedar and the dish soap she'd been ordering from a co-op catalog since 1974. They had 2 children, my father Charles, born in 1954, and my Aunt Ruth, born in 1957, who died of ovarian cancer in 2009. James worked at the Firestone textile mill in Gastonia for 28 years. He died of a heart attack in March of 1991, 3 months before I was born. I never met him. But I grew up in the presence of him. His photograph on the mantel between a brass candlestick and a ceramic bowl that had belonged to his mother, and the way my grandmother talked about him in the present tense, as if he'd just stepped around the corner and was expected back. That's the love I grew up watching, the kind that doesn't stop because the person is gone. I was born in October of 1989, the third and youngest child of Charles and Patricia Okafor, who had met at a church conference in 1980, married in 1982, and built their lives in Charlotte, 20 minutes up the interstate from Gastonia. My brother Marcus came first in 1986, my sister Denise in 1983. And then there was me, unplanned and eventually treasured, though the eventually is a detail my mother delivers with a laugh I've spent years deciding how to receive. Marcus and Denise were brilliant in ways that translated easily into the metrics our family knew how to measure. Marcus could calculate mortgage interest in his head before he was 12, attended North Carolina A&T State University on a partial scholarship, and by his mid-30s had built himself into a real estate developer in Atlanta with a portfolio he valued, at the last Thanksgiving he attended, at north of $2.5 million. He said it over turkey and sweet potato casserole, and my mother wrote it into her heart the way mothers archive the achievements that reflect well on them. Denise went to Howard University and then American University Washington College of Law, made partner at a D.C. firm called Kellner and Strauss at 36, and married Bernard Washington, a lobbyist who was tall and polished and said very little. They owned a townhouse in Chevy Chase that my mother referenced with the regularity of a liturgical calendar. And then there was me. I was smart in less legible ways. The child who stayed at the table after dinner and talked to adults, who read the books on my parents' shelves out of curiosity rather than assignment. I was not the kind of smart that announced itself. I was the kind that operates quietly and takes a long time to be seen. I went to UNC Charlotte on a combination of loans and a partial academic scholarship. I chose occupational therapy as my major, not because it was prestigious. My mother called it a nice practical profession, with a warmth that was also a ceiling. But because when I was 16, Grandma Vera had a knee replacement, and I spent the week after her surgery at Caromont Regional Medical Center in Gastonia, watching an occupational therapist named Cheryl Patterson work with her every afternoon. Cheryl was patient and precise, and unflappably kind, and she helped my grandmother regain not just mobility but agency, the quiet confidence that her body still answered to her. And I watched it happen and thought, with the clarity that only certain moments produce, that is what I want to do. I got my master's in occupational therapy from Winston-Salem State University in 2014 and was hired at Atrium Health in Charlotte that August at a starting salary of $58,000. I moved into a two-bedroom apartment in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood with my best friend Keisha Moreland, a speech therapist I'd met during my second-year clinical placement. Who was then and remains now the most perceptive person I have ever known, and also the funniest by a significant margin. From Charlotte, Gastonia was 40 minutes on a normal day. I started going to see Grandma Vera every Saturday in 2014, the week I moved back to the city. I told myself it was because she was getting older, and I wanted to spend the time while I had it. That was true. But it was also simpler. I wanted to be there. I liked sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of the instant coffee she kept in a tin decorated with a rooster, watching the light change in her backyard windows. I liked the particular quality of her attention. She listened to me in a way that very few people had ever listened to me, with her full self rather than one ear and a running internal commentary about the next thing she had to do. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I need to ask you something. If you have a grandmother like Vera in your life, someone who gave you a quieter and steadier kind of love than anyone else offered you, tell me about her in the comments. What made her yours? Because what happened between me and my grandmother started in the specific texture of that love, and nothing I'm about to share will land the way I intend it to if you don't first understand what she was to me. In October of 2017, Grandma Vera had a stroke. She was 77 years old. She had been managing high blood pressure for years with medication prescribed by her physician at Caromont Regional, Dr. Elaine Pruitt, who had been her doctor since 2002 and knew her well enough to keep sugar-free butterscotch candies in her desk because she knew Vera had a sweet tooth she refused to fully admit. The stroke happened on a Wednesday evening. Vera was in her kitchen making a pot of collard greens. She told me this later on one of her good days, when everything tilted. She got to the phone before she lost consciousness. She called my father's number from memory. He heard her voice and the sound of her going down, and he called 911 and drove to Gastonia, doing 90 miles an hour on I-85, with my mother calling him every 5 minutes, and him not picking up because he needed both hands on the wheel. She survived. The stroke was what her neurologist, Dr. Patricia Aldridge at Carolina's Medical Center in Charlotte, each called moderate. It left her speech and physical mobility largely intact, but it touched her mind. In the months following, her short-term memory became unreliable. She repeated herself in conversation without knowing she had. She grew confused at night, disoriented, sometimes frightened. A phenomenon Dr. Aldridge called sundowning. The formal diagnosis, delivered in a quiet office at Carolina's Medical in November of 2017, was vascular dementia. I drove to that appointment with my father. My mother was in Statesville managing her own mother's recovery from a fractured wrist, and Marcus and Denise were both unable to come on the specific day the appointment was scheduled. I sat beside my father when the word dementia entered the room and changed the air in it. He is not a man who cries easily. His eyes got very bright, and he pressed his lips together and nodded, and I understood that he was working hard to remain the composed person he had always been required to be. On the drive home, he said, "We'll figure this out." I said, "Yes." I did not tell him that I had already, over the previous 2 weeks, researched every memory care facility within 40 minutes of Gastonia, that I had spoken at length with a social worker at Caromont named Donna Fisher, who had walked me through every option available, that I already understood, with clinical clarity, that Vera could not safely remain alone in the house on Dunmore Street, and that I already knew the difference between what Medicare covered and what it didn't, which was the thing everyone in my family was going to assume would handle the situation. My father held a family call that Saturday. Marcus was on the line from Atlanta, Denise from DC, my parents at their kitchen table. I was in my car in the Plaza Midwood parking deck, having just come back from visiting Vera at her rehabilitation facility, where she'd had a good morning and recognized me immediately and held my hand for most of an hour without saying much. My father explained the diagnosis with the precision of an engineer laying out a structural problem. He said Vera needed memory care, specialized residential housing with trained staff, structured programming, and around-the-clock medical support. He said Medicare would likely cover some of it. He said they needed to investigate options. Marcus said he would look into it. He had contacts in the senior living space through his work, he said. It was the kind of sentence Marcus generated regularly, sentences that promised action through the implied leverage of professional adjacency. Denise said she had a colleague in D.C. who specialized in elder law and that she would reach out in the next week or two. My mother said she would call Medicare directly. I said nothing, because I had already done the math, and I already knew what it said. Medicare covered short-term rehabilitation and skilled nursing care in specific limited circumstances. It did not cover long-term residential memory care of the kind Vera needed. Medicaid in North Carolina would eventually cover it, but only after a spend-down of assets, meaning Vera would have to exhaust her savings and potentially lose the house on Dunmore Street before Medicaid stepped in. The house she had lived in for 53 years. And the house with James's photograph on the mantel and the rose bushes along the front walk. I had already toured Sunrise Senior Living on Robinson Road in Gastonia. I had already sat in the common room with the big south-facing windows and watched the afternoon light come in steady and gold across the floor. I had already thought, with the quiet certainty that only certain decisions produce, she should be here. The monthly cost for the memory care wing was $4,200. I made $68,000 a year. That was $5,667 per month before taxes, benefits, and my student loan payment of $312 on my Winston-Salem graduate debt. After all of it, I brought home roughly $3,900 per month. So I ran the numbers on a spreadsheet for 6 days. I ran them in the morning before work and in the evening after, and the numbers kept saying the same thing. I thought about calling another family meeting and laying out the full picture. Marcus made more than I did. Denise made significantly more. My parents had retirement income and a paid-off house and savings. A fair split would have been entirely manageable for all of them. But I knew, bone deep, the way you know things you've been watching your whole life, that if I called that meeting, it would become a negotiation, it would become a debate, and a timeline, and a set of competing priorities. And somewhere in the middle of all of it would be Vera, in her rehabilitation facility, waiting for her family to work out the logistics of their love. She had spent her entire life being the last thing anyone got around to. I was not going to let her wait while we scheduled a conference call. I signed the paperwork at Sunrise Senior Living on January 8, 2018. I set up an automatic ACH transfer of $4,200 per month from my Bank of America checking account to Sunrise Senior Living's billing account. I told Sandra Mills the arrangement was private. I did not tell my family. To everyone else, Vera's care at Sunrise was simply happening. My mother investigated the Medicare question superficially once and arrived at an incomplete answer, and I let her believe what she believed. No one asked to see a billing statement. No one asked who was paying. In my family, when something difficult is quietly getting handled, the people who aren't handling it have a remarkable capacity not to ask questions. I want to pause right here and ask you something before I continue. Has anyone in your family ever let you carry something heavy, something they could have seen if they'd only looked, while they simply chose not to look? Leave a comment. Tell me what that felt like. Because I spent 6 years in that particular silence and I want to know if you understand it. The first year was the hardest, practically. I moved out of the Plaza Midwood apartment I shared with Keisha and into a one-bedroom unit off Albemarle Road that was $340 per month cheaper, with a parking lot that flooded when it rained, and neighbors whose schedule appeared to involve very vigorous activity at 2 in the morning on weekdays. I told Keisha I needed my own space, which was partially true, and she gave me a long look that said she didn't entirely believe me and then helped me carry boxes. Because that is who Keisha is. I cut expenses with the methodical efficiency of someone doing triage. I stopped eating out except at the cheapest places. I dropped my gym membership and ran the Greenway instead, which was free and genuinely more scenic. I picked up per diem shifts at 2 additional atrium facilities on weekends, pediatric rehab at one, outpatient orthopedics at another, which brought in anywhere from $800 to $1,200 additional dollars per month depending on availability. I kept a spreadsheet that tracked my monthly income against Vera's care cost and my fixed expenses down to the last dollar. Most months, there was $150 left over. Some months, I moved money from my emergency fund and promised myself I'd replace it. My boyfriend at the time was Devin Park. We'd been together for 2 years, an IT project manager at Bank of America's uptown Charlotte offices, smart and steady and funny in a quiet way. The kind of man who remembered the exact thing you'd casually mentioned 3 months ago, and then arranged to do it. He was good. I want to say that clearly. Devin was a genuinely good man, and I was not fair to him. I was always tired. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I managed my finances with an obsessive precision that left no room for spontaneity. Devin wanted to take a trip to New Orleans for his birthday in the spring of 2019, something we'd been talking about since the previous summer, and a trip I genuinely wanted to take with him, and I said I couldn't afford it. He asked why. I said I was saving. He asked for what. I said I wasn't sure yet. He said that was the 3rd time in 4 months I'd given him that answer. I couldn't explain. I had built a structure of silence around this decision that was load-bearing. If I started explaining to Devin, I would have to explain everything. And everything included a choice I had made without consulting anyone. And if I laid that out loud, I would have to examine whether what I was doing was an act of love or an act of a woman who had been so thoroughly trained to manage everything alone that she had turned it into an entire life philosophy. I wasn't ready for that question. I'm not sure I'm done answering it now. Devin ended things in March of 2019 in his apartment in South End. He was kind about it. He said, quietly and with what I think was genuine sadness, that he didn't know how to love someone who wouldn't let him in. I drove home and sat in my car in the Albemarle Road parking lot and cried for about 10 minutes, which was all I had time for. And then I went inside and made a practical dinner and fell asleep by 9. I want to ask you this, and I mean it genuinely. If you were in my position, carrying a secret this size, paying this amount for this long, would you have told someone? Would you have let a partner in, even if it meant pulling the whole thing into the open? Or would you have done what I did and kept the structure sealed because you were afraid of what opening it might cost you? Leave a comment. I've thought about this longer than I should probably admit. Time moves differently when you're in survival mode. You stop measuring it in milestones and start measuring it in monthly transfers. January 2018, February, March. The seasons changed outside my window and I went to work and visited Vera on Saturdays and came home and did it again. Vera on her good days was still entirely Vera. She would know me the moment I came through the door at sunrise. She would reach across the table in the common room and squeeze my hand twice, a habit she'd had my entire life, a physical grammar we'd developed before I could have named it. I see you, it meant. I always understood it as that. On her harder days she was confused, sometimes frightened by the simplest sounds or shadows. She called me Ruth sometimes, which was my aunt's name, her daughter who had died in 2009. She called me baby in a general way that could have meant anyone. I was there for both versions of her. I came for the Vera who knew me and the Vera who didn't, and I made peace, over time, with the fact that both of those women were still her. Sandra Mills was Vera's primary care coordinator at Sunrise throughout all of those years. She was a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses she kept pushed up on her forehead, and a quiet, practiced efficiency I came to rely on completely. She would give me updates when I arrived on Saturdays, how Vera's week had gone, whether she'd eaten well, how her moods had been. Sandra knew from the billing records who was paying for Vera's care. She never said a word to me or to my family about it for 6 years. She was professional in the way that the best care workers are. She saw things with clarity and held them carefully, and used them only when they were needed. My career moved forward. I received a promotion to senior occupational therapist at Atrium in 2019, with a salary increase to $74,000. In early 2020, during the strange compressed time of the pandemic, I partnered with 2 colleagues, Margot Featherstone and Philip Juarez, both OTs from the pediatric unit, to open a small private clinic in a shared space on South Boulevard in Charlotte. We called it South Boulevard Rehabilitation Associates. The startup cost was modest because we shared overhead. By 2021, it was generating consistent income on top of my Atrium salary. By 2022, my combined earnings had crossed $91,000. And for the first time since January of 2018, there was breathing room. I found a therapist in 2020, Dr. Amara Osei at Charlotte Wellness Group, a direct patient woman in her late 40s with an instinct for the questions I was trying not to ask myself. Over many months and many sessions, she helped me understand the difference between care that comes from love and care that comes from a belief that you are not entitled to be cared for in return. She asked me once why I had never asked my family to contribute. I said I thought it would go badly. She said, "What would have happened if it had?" I sat with that question for weeks afterward, and I'm still not sure I've landed on a complete answer. I met Derek Nguyen at a birthday dinner for a friend in the late spring of 2021 at a restaurant in Noda called Haberdish. He was 41 and a landscape architect with his own small firm in Charlotte. A quiet man with a dry sense of humor and the habit of asking questions that were more interesting than the ones most people asked. On our second date, Coffee on Park Road, he asked me what I was most proud of in my life. I said I was proud that I showed up. He held that for a moment and then asked, "Showed up for what?" And I said, "For whoever needed me." He said, "Who shows up for you?" I didn't have an answer, and I think we both knew it, and he asked if he could see me again. In the fall of 2022, on a Sunday evening on Derek's back porch in Dilworth, watching the October light go flat and gold over his neighbor's oak tree, I told him everything. The January 2018 transfer. The $4,200 a month. Every month. For 58 months at that point. And the running total that had by then reached somewhere around $244,000. He was quiet for a long time, not an uncomfortable quiet, the kind that means someone is actually with you and not composing their response. Then he said, "Why didn't you ask them to help?" I said, "Because I already knew how it would go." He said, "I believe you." We sat on that porch in the cooling dark, and I felt, for the first time in years, that I was not the only person in the room who knew the full shape of what I was carrying. I had told no one else. Not my parents, not Marcus or Denise, not Keisha, who had married a pediatric dentist named Tremaine and moved to a house in Steel Creek, and who was still my closest friend even across the distance of our new lives. I had told one person, and that was enough. Enough to keep going. Then, in the spring of 2023, Sandra Mills called. She said Vera had had an unusually lucid day the previous Tuesday. Clear, present, coherent in a way that came and went with vascular dementia, and that you could never predict or hold on to. She said Vera had sat down with her that afternoon and asked, directly and calmly, who was paying for her care at sunrise. Sandra said she had told Vera that billing was handled by family. Vera had pressed. She'd asked which family member. Sandra said that Vera had been quiet for a moment, and then looked at her steadily and said, "Is it Natalie?" Sandra confirmed it. I was in my car in the atrium parking lot when she called me, travel mug going cold in the cup holder, April light coming through the windshield at a low angle. I felt something move through me when Sandra finished speaking. Not surprise, exactly, but something more like recognition. Of course she knew. She had always known me better than anyone else in that family ever tried to. Sandra asked if she should say anything further to Vera. I said to tell her the truth. All of it. I didn't see any point in protecting the secret from the one person it had always been most meant to protect. What I did not know, sitting in that parking lot, was that Vera had already, 3 weeks prior, in a window of clarity I hadn't been present for, made a phone call to Ronald Akins of Akins and Holloway in Gastonia, her attorney of nearly 30 years. Ronald Akins set his briefcase on the laminate table at Sunrise Senior Living and opened it with the deliberate efficiency of a man accustomed to carrying things other people had entrusted to him. He put on his reading glasses and arranged a small stack of documents in front of him with the particular care of someone who understood the weight of every piece of paper in the room. He said, Mrs. Okafor updated her will and estate documents on March 4th of this year. The update was executed during a documented period of full lucidity, confirmed in writing by Dr. Francis Webb of Caro Mont Regional Medical Center, and witnessed by 2 members of this facility's staff. It is legally sound and binding under North Carolina estate law. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when everyone in them is calculating something different. Ronald said, "The house at 1147 Dunmore Street in Gastonia, currently assessed at $342,000 by Gaston County, is bequeathed in full to Natalie Ades Okafor." My mother's hand moved on the table. A savings account at First Bank and Trust in Gastonia with a current balance of $87,500 is also bequeathed to Natalie Ades Okafor. Marcus was looking at a point in the middle distance. He had stopped blinking in the way that I recognized, from 37 years of knowing his face, as the expression he made when he needed very badly to appear composed. Denise's pen had stopped moving against her legal notepad. She was watching Ronald Akins with a focused professional attention that was perfectly controlled, except for a slight tension along her jaw. My father said, "What?" He said it quietly, not the what of a man who is angry, but the what of a man who has been handed information that his entire existing framework cannot immediately process. Ronald reached into his briefcase and removed a single sheet of paper. He put on his reading glasses. He said, Mrs. Okafor prepared a handwritten letter to be read in the presence of her immediate family. She asked that it be read without interruption. He cleared his throat. He read, "To my family. I am not confused. I want you to know that first, because I know you will wonder. I know what I know, and I have known it longer than any of you think. For 6 years, Natalie has been paying for my care at this facility. Not a part of it. All of it. $4,200 every month for 6 years. She did not tell you. She did not tell me. She made a decision and she kept it, because that is who she has always been. I only found out because I asked. I asked because I have watched Natalie come through that door every Saturday for 6 years without a single exception. And I am her grandmother, and I know my girl. Natalie never asked me to know what she was doing. She didn't do it to be thanked, or seen, or rewarded. She did it because she decided I deserved dignity, and she was the only one who acted on that decision. That is what love is, not what you say you will do, What you do when no one is watching, when there is nothing in it for you, when it costs you something real. I am leaving my house and my savings to Natalie because she has already given me something no inheritance could come close to matching. But I want her to have it anyway. She has earned something of her own. To the rest of my family, I love each of you. I am not angry. But I want you to sit with this. I want you to think about who showed up. Love, Grandma Vera. Ronald folded the letter with the same care with which he had unfolded it and placed it back on the table in front of him. The room held what it had just been given. My father looked at me. Not at Marcus. Not at Denise. Not at my mother. At me. His face was doing something I had not seen it do in 34 years of being his daughter. He said my name, just Natalie, one word, in a voice that sounded like something structural had given way inside him. Denise said, her voice controlled and even, "I have serious concerns about the legal validity of a document executed given the circumstances of Mrs. Okafor's current." Ronald said, "Are without heat." I anticipated that. Dr. Webb's clinical notes from March 4th document a 2-hour period of full lucidity. Both witnesses' statements are on file. The execution meets every requirement under Chapter 31 of the North Carolina General Statutes. I'm happy to respond to any formal inquiry through counsel. Denise wrote something on her notepad. I didn't try to see what. Marcus said nothing at all. He sat with his phone face down on the table and he said nothing. And his silence was the loudest thing in the room. I looked at Sandra Mills near the door. She met my eyes for just a moment. A small, quiet nod. Then she looked away and let us have the room. Denise hired a probate attorney named Gordon Frame within 2 weeks of the family meeting. He sent a formal challenge to Ronald Akins on grounds of diminished capacity at the time of execution. Ronald's response was 14 pages long. It included Dr. Francis Webb's complete clinical notes from March 4th, the witness statements from 2 Sunrise staff members whose combined tenure at the facility was 21 years, and a thorough legal analysis of North Carolina estate precedent. Gordon Frame withdrew the challenge 41 days later. Denise sent me a text 3 days after the withdrawal. It said, "I hope you feel good about yourself." I read it twice. I didn't respond. I'm not going to dress that up as dignity. It was partly that I didn't know what to say to a sentence like that, and partly that I genuinely believed no response was more honest than any response I could have constructed. We have not spoken beyond that. I don't carry bitterness about Denise. I carry something quieter and more complicated, a clear-eyed understanding of who she is and what she prioritizes, and a recognition that understanding someone and being close to them are not the same thing. Marcus texted me in July, 3 months after the meeting. He wrote, "I've been thinking a lot. I don't really know what to say." I wrote back, "You don't have to say anything." I meant it completely. There was nothing he could have said that would change the previous 6 years. And there was nothing he could have said that I needed. My father called me 10 days after the meeting and asked if I would have breakfast with him. We went to the Waffle House on Independence Boulevard in Charlotte. A choice I think he made deliberately, because the Waffle House doesn't allow for ceremony. He needed to be somewhere that didn't allow him to perform composure. We sat in a corner booth in the bright morning noise. His coffee sat untouched in front of him for a long time. He said, "I didn't know, Natalie." I said, "I know you didn't, Dad." He said, "I should have asked. I should have known to look." I said, "Yes." He pressed his lips together. His eyes grew very bright. He reached for a paper napkin and he cried, quietly and without theater, in the way that men of his generation cry when they finally allow it, sparingly and with the full weight of having waited too long. I did not tell him it was okay. It wasn't entirely okay. And he deserved honesty more than comfort in that moment. But I put my hand on the table, and after a moment his hand came down on top of mine. And we stayed like that while the waitress refilled our coffee and the morning moved around us. We have breakfast once a month now, sometimes at that same Waffle House, sometimes at a diner in Matthews that he likes. He tells me things about Vera I didn't know. The particular song she hummed while she cooked. Something from a radio program she loved in the early 60s. A story about my grandfather's mother's watch that I had never heard in 34 years. We are building something, my father and I. I don't know exactly what shape it will take when it's finished, but I think it has good bones. I did not sell the house on Dunmore Street. I wasn't ready to. I worked with a property management company called Renew Property Group out of Gastonia to list it as a rental in late summer of 2023. A family named the Warfields moved in that October, Marcus and Deja Warfield, a couple in their mid-40s and their 15-year-old son, and they pay $1,650 per month on the first without exception. I drove by the house the week before they moved in and stood at the curb for a few minutes. The rose bushes were still there. I left a note in the Warfields' welcome packet asking them to reach out if they ever wanted help with the front garden. Derek proposed in November of 2023. We were on his back porch in Dilworth, the same place I'd told him everything, the October cold settling in around us. He had made dinner and set the table outside and lit candles, and I had thought he was just being Derek, a man who makes ordinary evenings feel like they deserve attention. He was standing in front of me with a ring from a jewelry designer on Park Road named Sasha Gaines, who had worked with him for 2 months to get it exactly right. A simple gold band with a small round diamond and a secondary stone in deep blue tourmaline that matched nothing in particular except, Derek said, a color he associated with me. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We stood on that back porch in the dark, and I thought about all the Saturdays and all the ACH transfers and all the years of doing the only thing that had seemed obvious to me, and I thought, so this is what is on the other side of all of that. We are getting married this spring. We're under contract on a house in Noda, 4 blocks from the clinic on South Boulevard. I enrolled in the Doctorate of Occupational Therapy program at UNC Charlotte in the fall of 2023. The program I had quietly set aside in 2018 when the numbers stopped working. I am writing a dissertation on sensory processing interventions in older adults with vascular dementia, a topic my advisor, Dr. Celestine Okafor-James, says has genuine clinical application, and which I chose, I think, because it is the most direct way I know to keep showing up for people like Vera even after she is gone. I have Vera's savings account. I have the rental income from Dunmore Street. For the first time in 6 years, I am making financial decisions that are not organized entirely around someone else's survival. It is an odd feeling. A good one. I am still learning how to fully occupy it. I go to Sunrise Senior Living every Saturday. That hasn't changed. Vera is 83 now. She is small in her chair by the window in the common room. The same chair, the same room where the afternoon light still comes in clean and gold across the floor every day around 4 o'clock. On most Saturdays, she doesn't know my name anymore. She knows my face sometimes, in the way that you can recognize a face without the mechanism that connects it to a name. She knows the shape of my hand when I put it in hers. She squeezes twice. Sometimes, that old reflex, still there in the muscle even when the cognition that created it has dimmed, the way a melody stays in your body long after the words have gone. I sit with her, and we watch whatever is on the television. Wheel of Fortune, when it's on, and which she still seems to track in some wordless way. Something in the structure of it is familiar to her at a level that goes deeper than memory. I talk to her about my week, about Derek, about the house in Noda, about the dissertation. I don't know how much she processes. I talk anyway. I have always talked to Vera knowing that the talking mattered regardless of whether it was fully received. I did not pay for 6 years of her care so she would reward me. I want to say that plainly, not as performance, but because the truth of why I did it is simple enough not to require embellishment. She was my grandmother. She had spent her entire life keeping the porch swept, and the rose bushes pruned, and the coffee tin full, and the door unlocked for whoever might come by. She had kept James's photograph on the mantel for 32 years. She had sat at her kitchen table and listened to me with her whole self. She deserved to be somewhere clean and safe and well-staffed, with good light in the afternoon and people who knew her name. She deserved not to lose that house. She deserved not to become an unresolved item on a family agenda. So I showed up. Every month, every Saturday, for 72 months. 72 months at $4,200, $302,400 in total, if anyone was keeping a running count. I wasn't. The inheritance was Vera's gift. Her way of saying, across the silence of 6 years, I see you too. I am grateful for it. The house with the rose bushes, the savings account, and most of all the letter. Those words in her careful hand. She did it because she decided I deserved dignity. I think about that sentence often. I think about what it is to be truly seen by the person who matters most to you. She is still here. I am still going. Every Saturday, same chair, same window, her hand in mine. That's the whole story. Before I go, I want to ask you one last thing. My grandmother figured out what I had done without me ever saying a single word to her. She watched me come through that door every Saturday for 6 years, and she knew. I still think about that. The people in our lives who see us quietly, without asking to be told, who are paying a different kind of attention than everyone else in the room. Was there someone like that for you? Someone who saw you steadily, clearly, even when everyone else was looking somewhere else? Leave that person's name in the comments, or just tell me about them. I want to know. And if this story stayed with you, if you saw something of yourself in it, or in Vera, or even in the people who chose not to look, check the description. There are more stories there. More women, more rooms, more hands held across difficult tables. Thank you for being here with me today.